Hello?
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Robert Young.
What's going on, Captain?
I am so sorry I had you down at 10:30 Pacific. My goodness. Well, what's doing? I'm nursing that first cup of coffee and shaking off the cobwebs. How are you, sir?
Well, I haven't had my coffee either, so that makes us equal.
I humbly apologize. I just realized the schedule didn't indicate Pacific or Eastern, so I just got a message from my publicist said, "Uh-oh."
Well, I run into that all the time, especially with those rock bands out there in California. They'll say, okay, they're going to talk at 12:30, and then it's really 9:30 their time. Or somebody like this morning, I was talking with somebody out in Hollywood, and it was a 9:30 conversation. It was really 6:30 in the morning where they were.
Oh, geez. Well, good thing I'm not in a rock band. Then I would have had a real excuse for you.
So how do you deal with that as a pilot? Because, I mean, you cross several different time zones. I mean, we read about that in the Vagabond pilot.
Yes, we do. Well, it was interesting. When going westbound, of course, I got an extra hour. Going eastbound, I was pressed when I would cross a time zone, pressed for that extra hour because it meant getting up earlier, etc.
When you were flying across this country in that small airplane, did you not feel like that you were visiting the world's greatest art gallery? Because that's one of the reasons why I like to fly is I love looking at the lay of the land.
You know, you really hit it right on the head. I was fascinated growing up in the East. When we were in grade school, they had the textbook of the Rocky Mountains, and you'd learn about the mesas in New Mexico and the Rocky Mountains and the Grand Canyon. And then when you fly over these things, well, it's one thing from an airliner, but when I got down so low, this was really things were much more distinguishable. It is such a great expanse. It was really thrilling. I know you think you're older and you get jaded, but it was like when I was coming over to New Mexico, and I could actually, because I was so low, I could see how the mesas were stepping down, stepping up, and then into Texas, all of a sudden it got very green and greener, and you say, no wonder they have so many cattle. and the bayous along the coast from Texas to Louisiana. Yes, you could really distinguish things down low. So it was a real geography lesson. I think even more fascinating was, being a history and a political science buff, how you could see how the country grew, because all the communities were located on waterways, and in the Midwest, there were all the farms, and then there would be an airport and a community like 50 miles apart. So you can see how it all kind of spread out. It was really fascinating.
One of the things that I will look at when I'm up in the air is the fact that I'll look at the highways when you're low enough to do that, and you can tell to me which city had the greater politicians, and the reason why is because the strong politicians have the better streets for their personal cities.
Yeah, they got all the federal funds for the interstate highway, I guess.
They do.
But, that's a very interesting point. I remark about it when I'm passing by Chicago, and living in L.A., you deal with the freeways and you see it's all over. But you could see how all the freeways emanated from the city to the point of the lake where Chicago was, Lake Michigan, and spread out into the suburbs. And all this population grew from there because of those highways, I surmise.
What was more lonelier, being up there in that airplane or writing the book?
Being in the airplane. I wrote the book contemporaneously as I traveled.
Ooh.
But I think you might have hit a good point, because in the editing, it was arduous. That's where the real work, when the editor got a hold of me and started cutting all my wonderful poetry of writing, that all of a sudden, wait a minute, I like that. No, but That's where it really was work. So it was in the airplane that you felt much more solitude.
How did you get used to that editing with the editor? Only because, I mean, my first book, I had to go through 5 rewrites, and that, you know, it starts getting inside your head, and you no longer believe in the project. How did you keep going?
Well, I have a very dear friend who is a New York Times best-selling author, a lady named Terry Cheney. She wrote a book called Manic, and has become a leading persona on bipolar mania. And Terry was kind of a coach about her experience going through it. She's on her 4th book, and she said, "You got to fight for what you believe, and don't be shy about it. If you really insist that, you know, go to battle with the editor." So I had that kind of marching orders in my back of my head, and I had to be convinced when something needed to be eradicated. For instance, one of the most impactful stories that I came across was when I got waylaid. Luckily, I didn't keep flying when I got that segment going back to Tucson, and had to divert to Truth or Consequences in New Mexico. And I spent a little time touring, and I went into this museum, and it was all about our displacement, I'm being very kind, of the Indians, the Native Americans. And there were so many stories from the Native American experience, and it was just overwhelming. So I wrote a lot about how in our manifest destiny we kind of weren't very nice. And the author said, no. The editor said, no, we're getting rid of all this. It was pages, Arrow. It was like, I was writing a whole dissertation. No, you're distracting. We want to get back to the story. People want to know when you're finishing already, you know, so... We did battle, that's for sure.
I'm going to ask you an everyday person question. In the way that your book, Vagabond Pilot, has you flying across the country, across and then coming back. When you have to land, do you whip out the credit card and have to pay that airport to use their strip?
No. Very few general aviation airports charge for landing fees or transit fees when you visit. They will charge for an overnight parking fee. Like in Dallas, it was pretty expensive, but in most cities, in towns, it's $5 or $10 for an overnight fee. Wow. But no, you do not get charged for landing fees in general aviation. In the big planes, of course, they pay a landing fee based upon their weight. So a 737 is less than a 747, et cetera.
As part of your southern travels, you flew across the Carolinas.
Yes.
How about
that? And I was glad that I wanted to talk to you about that. That was fascinating to me, because you read about how the 13 colonies were settled in North Carolina, and North Carolina was interesting because you could see how the rivers emptied out into the ocean, and then up from the ocean a little ways was the city, like Wilmington, right? It was up from the ocean, and all of the cities I noticed were the same. So that was fascinating, because that's actually how it happened. They must have had to find refuge up the river from being on the ocean when they were in port, so to speak. So it was, and North Carolina is so beautifully forested. So, and the whole East Coast is a whole different trip from the West. The West is so arid, and there's not as many trees as in the East Coast. It's just forested, so that the airport or cities are just a little cut out in this green blanket, so to speak. And as you read, I had a little trouble locating Danbury at the end, but yes, North Carolina was fascinating from the air.
How did you deal with get home-itis? Because, I mean, inside your mind, you had to have said, I got to get home. But yet you were so many hundreds and thousands of miles away.
I didn't do a very good job.
Okay.
and that's where as the book reaches its how could I say, climax, so to speak, before I arrive in Los Angeles. But for the intervention of an angel, I would have been a statistic because of get home-itis. And it really surprised me because as a pilot, you know, many years, I would never, when you read, I would always read about pilot reports and accidents, and you try to learn. As my instructor said, you know, you get a license and it's a license to learn. And, I would never do that. I would have done this. I would have done that. And yet, I think in retrospect, get home-itis almost put me off the planet here because I had such a narrow window and the weather kept pressing me. And then when I was trying to beat that storm coming up from Baja to cut across the New Mexico mountains into Tucson, I didn't really consider the effect of climbing over 12,500 and flying for more than 30 minutes. You need oxygen. Yeah. And that's why I was up there for 45, 50 minutes and hypoxia started to set in. And if I didn't hear from the controller the significant meteorological warning that, hey, Safford, Arizona has embedded thunderstorms, you better divert. I wouldn't have known or been not conscious, but I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to make a judgment that I should divert. I would have just kept on flying, happy and dumb the way I was. So it was a little bit scary, and get home-itis. I think the classic case is John F. Kennedy Jr.'s.
Yep. That's what I was thinking about. Yep, that's what I was thinking about.
You know, gosh, right? He had to get to that wedding that night, and all these factors was upon him, and he thought he could handle it, and sadly not. So, yes, it's a dark beast indeed.
Is there a website where listeners can go to give you some love and to find out more about you?
No, I have not finished my website, but thank you for asking. The book is available on Amazon and at redskypresents.com. And I thank you for speaking with you this morning. And I'm so sorry I was late. This is tape, right?
Well, that just showed me how old you are because with tape, I think we stopped using that back in 2005.
No, what do you use? What do you say now?
We just use it. I just record it.
Oh.
Well, Captain Robert Young, man, you got to come back to this show anytime in the future. The door is always going to be open for you.
I would love that. Thank you so much, and happy holidays to you and all your listeners.
Same to you. Go get that cup of coffee now.
All the best now. Bye-bye.
Bye, guy.